Alone, she took a shower in her millionaire boss' luxurious bathroom, not imagining he would catch her. The heat that afternoon felt cruel, almost intentional, as if the sky itself had decided to test how much a human body could endure before breaking. The sun hovered mercilessly over the sprawling glass and stone mansion, turning every surface into a heat trap. Inside, the air conditioning hummed faintly, but not everywhere. Not where Elena Moore was working. By the time the clock crept past 2 in the afternoon, Elena's body was screaming in protest. Her cotton cleaning uniform clung to her skin, soaked through with sweat. Her arms ached from hours of scrubbing marble floors that gleamed brighter than mirrors. Her back burned from bending and lifting over and over, as she worked her way through room after room of a house so large it felt more like a private hotel than a home. Elena had been invisible here for nearly a year. She arrived before sunrise and left after sunset, making sure everything sparkled without ever leaving a trace of herself behind. No fingerprints. No personal items. No complaints. That was the unspoken rule. The mansion belonged to Victor Hale, a self-made millionaire whose name regularly appeared in business magazines beside words like genius, visionary, and most eligible bachelor. He built empires out of ideas and algorithms. People spoke about him in awe. But to Elena, Victor Hale was simply the quiet man who passed her in the hallways without really seeing her. He nodded politely. Sometimes he said good morning. Most days he didn't, and that was fine. Men like him lived in a world Elena had never been invited into. She understood that. Today at least she believed she was alone. Victor had left 3 days earlier for an international conference. His assistant had confirmed it twice. Elena had planned her schedule carefully, deep cleaning the upper floors while the house stood empty and silent. That was how she found herself standing in front of the double doors to Victor Hale's private suite. She hesitated. The master wing was always the hardest. Not because of the work, but because of what it represented. Excess. Luxury. A life so far removed from hers that it felt almost fictional. When she pushed the doors open, the heat hit her like a wall. The air conditioning was off. Elena wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving behind a faint streak of dust she hadn't even noticed clinging to her skin. Her heart sank. Cleaning this room in this heat would take at least another hour. She moved slowly through the bedroom, stripping sheets, dusting surfaces, avoiding the tall windows that flooded the space with sunlight. And then she saw it, the bathroom door slightly ajar. She stopped. The master bathroom was enormous. Every surface gleamed with pale marble veined in silver. The floors were heated. The mirrors were rimless and flawless. At the center stood a glass-enclosed rainfall shower, fitted with multiple body jets and controls that looked more like something from a luxury spa than a private home. Elena had cleaned this bathroom dozens of times, but she had never stood in it like this. She stood there now, breathing heavily, her clothes damp, her skin sticky and uncomfortable. The thought arrived quietly, almost innocently. Just water. She shook her head immediately as if to dislodge it. No, absolutely not. This wasn't her place. This wasn't her life. She was here to clean, not to imagine. But the heat pressed down harder. Her shirt stuck to her back. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion. Victor was thousands of miles away. No one would know. She told herself she would be quick. 5 minutes. She wouldn't touch anything that wasn't necessary. She'd use her own towel. She'd clean everything afterward until there was no sign she'd ever been there. Elena's heart pounded as she locked the bedroom door. Her hands shook as she undressed. The moment the cool water poured over her shoulders, she gasped. It felt like mercy. The water washed away sweat, grime, and exhaustion in seconds. Her shoulders loosened. Her breathing slowed. For the first time all day, she closed her eyes without pain. For just a moment, she let herself pretend. Pretend she belonged here. Pretend this kind of comfort wasn't forbidden. Pretend she wasn't always one mistake away from losing everything. She didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear footsteps climbing the stairs. She didn't hear anything until the bathroom door swung open. The sound sliced through the air like glass shattering. Elena's eyes flew open. A man stood frozen in the doorway. Victor Hale. Time stopped. 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then Elena screamed. Victor turned instantly, his back snapping toward her, one hand flying up to shield his eyes. His voice came out strained and shocked. I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. Elena's entire body shook. Panic crashed through her chest so violently she thought she might collapse. I'm so sorry, she managed, her voice breaking. Please don't turn around. I'll leave. I'll go. I swear. Her mind raced ahead to disaster. Being fired. being humiliated, losing the job that paid her mother's medical bills, letting everyone down over one foolish decision. This was it. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. Victor stayed exactly where he was. "You're not leaving," he said firmly. "Get dressed. We'll talk downstairs." When he left, Elena sank against the tiled wall, shaking. Something had changed. And whatever came next would change everything. What he saw wasn't what he expected. Elena barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory replayed itself with cruel clarity: the bathroom door opening, the sudden shock on Victor Hale's face, the unbearable weight of shame pressing down on her chest. She lay on her narrow bed in her small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic, wondering how one impulsive moment had rewritten her future. By morning, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. She arrived at the mansion earlier than usual, half expecting the front gates to remain locked, half expecting a message telling her not to return. When nothing happened, no call, no warning, no termination notice, her nerves tightened even more. The house felt different now. Not quieter. Not louder. Just aware. Victor was home. She found him in the kitchen just after 9. He stood near the counter, sleeves rolled up, dark circles beneath his eyes, staring at a tablet without really seeing it. When he looked up and noticed her, something unreadable crossed his face. "Good morning," he said. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. "Good morning, sir," Elena replied, keeping her eyes down. Victor hesitated. "You don't have to call me that." She nodded but didn't respond. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, thick, fragile, filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. Elena busied herself with wiping down the counters, her movements precise and careful, as though one wrong motion might shatter the moment. "I want to talk about yesterday," Victor said finally. Her hands froze. She turned slowly, bracing herself. "I'm listening." Victor exhaled. "First, what happened was my fault too. I should have checked if anyone was home. I should have announced myself. I didn't." Elena swallowed. "I shouldn't have been there." "Yes," he agreed calmly. "But that doesn't make you a criminal." That surprised her. He continued, "I hired you to keep this place running. And you do. Perfectly. Yesterday made me realize something uncomfortable." She glanced up, uncertain. "I didn't notice how hard you work," Victor admitted. "Not really. I saw results, not the person behind them." Elena didn't know what to say to that. Apologies from people like Victor Hale didn't come often. When they did, they usually came wrapped in excuses. This one didn't. "I don't want you feeling like you have to steal basic comfort just to get through the day," he added. "That shouldn't happen here." A small, painful laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "With respect, this house isn't exactly built for people like me." Victor looked at her sharply. "People like you?" She shrugged. "Staff." For a moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "That word has been doing too much work in my life." From that day on things shifted. Not dramatically. Not publicly. But steadily. Victor started noticing. He noticed when her shoes were worn thin and replaced them without comment. When the heat rose, he made sure the air conditioning was on in every wing. He asked if the cleaning schedule was reasonable. If she needed help. If she had eaten. The first time he invited her to sit and eat lunch with him, she almost refused. Almost. They sat across from each other at the long kitchen island, cardboard containers of food between them, the distance between their worlds shrinking by inches. Conversation came slowly at first, then easier. He asked about her life. She told him only what she thought was safe, about growing up in a small town, about working multiple jobs, about responsibility arriving too early and never leaving. She didn't tell him about the nights she skipped dinner so her mother could eat, or how fear followed her everywhere like a shadow. Victor listened. Really listened. "You're not invisible," he said one afternoon, almost to himself. Elena smiled politely but didn't respond. She had learned not to trust words too quickly. It was during one of those lunches that she began to notice the change in how he looked at her. Not like a possession. Not like an employee. Like a person. The house, however, had its own opinions. When Victor hosted a small dinner for business associates, Elena stayed late to help serve. She wore a simple black dress and tied her hair back neatly, determined to remain professional. That was when Lydia Cross arrived. Lydia moved like she owned every room she entered. She was beautiful in the way magazines celebrated, tall, confident, expensive. She greeted Victor with familiarity, brushing his arm, laughing too easily, lingering too long. Elena noticed everything. She also noticed how Lydia looked at her. Not with curiosity. Not with kindness. With dismissal. Later that evening, while clearing plates in the hallway, Elena overheard Lydia's voice drifting from around the corner. "She's just the help," Lydia said casually into her phone. "Victor always has someone cleaning up after him. It's cute actually." Elena stood still, the words slicing deeper than she expected. It wasn't new. She had heard worse. But something about hearing it here, after everything that had changed, made it sting more sharply. When the guests finally left, Victor found Elena finishing up in the kitchen. "You did great tonight," he said. "Thank you," she replied softly. He hesitated. "Lydia and we're not together." She didn't look at him. "You don't owe me explanations." "I know," he said. "But I wanted you to know." That night, Elena walked home under the city lights, her mind heavy with questions she didn't dare ask. She felt something growing, something dangerous. Hope. And hope, she knew, could be the cruelest thing of all. Because the world had a way of reminding people like her exactly where they belonged. And soon it would try to remind her again. They tried to put her back in her place. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. Elena noticed it in the way the house suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. Victor had been in meetings all morning, pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and tense. When he finally left for the afternoon, the silence he left behind felt heavy, unsettled. Elena tried to ignore it. She always did. But by the end of the week, the tension followed her beyond the mansion's gates. It began with whispers. The catering staff at Victor's next event looked at her differently. One of the junior assistants avoided her gaze altogether. A woman she'd exchanged polite smiles with for months suddenly scoffed when Elena passed by with a tray. "She's gotten bold," someone muttered. Elena pretended not to hear. She had survived worse than gossip. But this wasn't random cruelty, it had intention behind it. Someone was feeding the story, reshaping it, sharpening it into something ugly. She didn't know who. Not yet. The answer came the night of Victor's charity gala. The event filled the mansion with crystal glasses, tailored suits, and people who spoke effortlessly about money as if it were oxygen. Elena worked silently, her posture straight, her face neutral, reminding herself of her place. Until Lydia Cross approached her. Lydia's smile was flawless and empty. "You," she said, snapping her fingers. "I need a drink." Elena turned calmly. "Of course." Lydia leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to cut. "You should be careful, you know. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed." Elena met her gaze. "I don't know what you mean." Lydia laughed softly. "Oh, I think you do." Later, in front of guests, it happened. A wine glass slipped from Elena's hand, not by accident. Lydia had bumped into her sharply, then stepped back as red liquid splashed across a white marble floor. The room went silent. Gasp. Murmurs. Judgment. "I'm so sorry," Lydia said loudly, eyes glittering. "I didn't see you there." Victor turned, confusion flashing across his face. Elena knelt immediately, hands shaking as she tried to clean the spill, heat flooding her cheeks. Every instinct told her to disappear. "Careful," Lydia added sweetly. "Some people just aren't meant for these spaces." That was when Victor spoke. "That's enough." The room froze. He walked toward them, his voice calm, but unmistakably sharp. Elena didn't spill anything. "You pushed her." Lydia's smile faltered. "Victor, don't be ridiculous." "I watched it happen." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Victor extended his hand to Elena. "You're done for the night." The gesture alone spoke volumes. But the damage had already been done. The next morning, headlines didn't mention her name, but they didn't need to. Billionaire's household staff crosses boundaries. Questions raised about professionalism inside Hale Estate. Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. She hadn't spoken to a reporter. She hadn't said a word. Someone else had. Her phone buzzed. Message after message from acquaintances who suddenly remembered she existed. Some were kind. Most were curious. A few were cruel. Victor called her immediately. "I'm handling this," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I don't belong in your world," Elena whispered. "Yes, you do," he replied without hesitation. "And I won't let them tear you down." But the pressure mounted. Sponsors threatened to withdraw. Board members questioned his judgment. People who had never noticed Elena before now spoke her name like a warning. And still she kept showing up. Until the night Victor found her sitting alone in the kitchen, eyes red, hands clenched around a mug she hadn't touched. "They'll never see me as anything else," she said quietly. Victor crouched in front of her. "Then let them see the truth." "What truth?" He hesitated. Yours. Elena didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But soon the world would. The truth they never expected. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with gold lettering and sealed in an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Elena stared at it for a long time before opening it. A public forum. A charity summit. Press, investors, board members, donors, everyone who mattered in Victor Hale's world would be there. Victor had been invited to speak about ethical leadership, workplace equity, and responsibility. And at the bottom, in handwriting unmistakably his, was a short note. Please come with me. Her first instinct was to refuse. She had spent her life learning how to survive by staying small, by making herself unnoticeable, by never giving the world another excuse to hurt her. Stepping into a room filled with people who had already judged her felt like walking willingly into a storm. But Victor didn't pressure her. He simply said, I think it's time you stopped hiding. The day of the event, Elena stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. She wore a simple navy dress, not flashy, not extravagant, but elegant in a way that felt honest. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. She looked like herself. The venue buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed as Victor arrived, questions flying from every direction. Elena walked beside him, not behind. The whispers started immediately. Isn't that her? The housekeeper? What is she doing here? Victor took the stage. He spoke confidently at first, about innovation, success, the responsibility that came with power. The crowd nodded, comfortable, familiar with this version of him. Then his tone changed. Recently, he said, I watched how easily people judged someone based on where they thought she belonged. The room stilled. I saw how quickly compassion disappeared when assumptions took over. Elena felt her heart pound. Victor turned slightly toward her. I want you to meet Elena more. The camera lenses shifted. She works in my home, he continued. But that is not the sum of who she is. Elena's breath caught. Before she ever cleaned a single room in my house, Victor said, Elena was a software engineer. Gasps rippled through the audience. She graduated top of her class. She designed systems used by non-profit organizations to protect vulnerable communities. She left that career to support her family during a medical crisis, and never once complained. Lydia Cross, seated near the front, went pale. Victor wasn't finished. When people humiliated her, he said calmly, they didn't just reveal their ignorance. They revealed their values. The room erupted in murmurs. Elena stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but then it steadied. I didn't come here to defend myself, she said. I came to remind you that dignity isn't tied to a job title. Respect shouldn't be conditional. Silence followed. And then applause. Not polite applause. Real applause. For the first time in her life, Elena wasn't invisible. And the people who tried to break her realized something too late. They had underestimated the wrong woman. Justice spoke, and everyone heard. The applause didn't stop when Elena finished speaking. It grew. It rolled through the hall in waves, rising from scattered claps into a unified sound that filled every corner of the room. People stood. Some slowly, some immediately, as if afraid that sitting any longer would place them on the wrong side of history. Elena remained still, stunned by the force of it. For the first time in her life, the room wasn't looking through her. They were looking at her. Victor stepped beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered urgently into microphones. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. And Lydia Cross sat frozen. Her confident posture had collapsed inward. The carefully rehearsed smile she wore so effortlessly now looked brittle, almost painful to maintain. She had built her power on assumptions, on the belief that status was inherited, not earned. And in one moment that illusion shattered. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, articles flooded online. Not about scandal, but about hypocrisy. Millionaire exposes class bias at charity summit. The woman they dismissed was the most qualified person in the room. Sponsors who once questioned Victor's judgment issued quiet apologies. Board members backtracked. Invitations poured in for Elena to speak, consult, collaborate. But the moment that mattered most came later that night. Elena stood alone on the balcony of the mansion, city lights glowing below like constellations fallen to earth. The air was cool now, gentle, forgiving. Victor joined her. I should have seen you sooner, he said quietly. She smiled, not bitterly, not triumphantly, but softly. I didn't need you to save me. I know, he replied. I just didn't want to stay silent anymore. The next morning, Elena handed Victor her resignation. He stared at the envelope, confused. "You don't have to leave." "I know," she said. "But I don't want to hide anymore either." Weeks later, Elena stood in a very different room, this one filled with young professionals, single parents, and people who had been told their dreams were impractical. She spoke about resilience, about dignity, about how survival sometimes forces people into shadows, but that shadows don't erase worth. Lydia Cross, meanwhile, faced consequences of her own. Sponsors withdrew from her ventures. Invitations dried up. Her carefully curated image cracked under scrutiny. The same society she had relied on to protect her turned away without hesitation. Instant karma had no mercy. Victor watched Elena from a distance now, not as her employer, not as her protector, but as a man who had learned a powerful lesson too late and just in time. Respect wasn't about wealth. It was about humanity. And Elena Moore walked forward, not because someone lifted her up, but because she had always been standing taller than they realized.